I am Carol Angela Davis. I've got your news today. Okay, folks, a new executive order from President Trump. Yes, it makes it easier to hire you and fire you. That's right, folks. If you work for the federal government, the last bastion of where we think we might not just get fired for nothing from a job. Okay. So that's the same government that you fund with your taxes. Well, now Trump has stripped some protections from federal workers. Federal employee unions say it is the biggest change to federal workforce protections in a century. That's right, folks. It means if you say the wrong thing, you can be fired at will. That means if you disagree with something that President Trump says and he doesn't like it, you can be, or one of his underlings doesn't like it, and we know he stacked the government with them, you can be fired, all right? So why would you target those career policy making career related positions? Because these are people who are in a position to make policy. Because of course, if Donald Trump is wrong about any issue, we're talking climate change, we're talking public health, you can't say anything, because if you do, you're probably going to get fired. That is a doggone shame. All right, to enforce this, Trump has created a new category of federal employment called Schedule F, and agencies have 90 days to determine which policy-related positions fit into the new category, and of course the new now dangerous status. All righty, folks. In economic news, a black Oakland business group is trying to buy the Oakland Coliseum site for an NFL franchise. Yes, folks, the group wants to buy the city of Oakland stake in the Coliseum site. That's so they can build a new stadium, making it more attractive for the NFL to put a franchise back there in Oakland. The name of the group is the African American Sports and Entertainment Group. It's going to offer $92.5 million to buy the city of Oakland's portion of the Oakland Coliseum site. Now, the Oakland A's have just purchased the other half from the county, and they too are trying to get the city of Oakland's stake, but they're not going to get it because we've been locked out of everything with this systemic racism, and we are going to get our fair share of our country, okay? Now, one of the mainstays of creating generational wealth in America is home ownership. That's right, folks. That's one reason why African Americans have far less generational wealth than do their white counterparts. Now, according to a study called The Unequal Cost of Black Home Ownership, African Americans pay over $13,000 more for their homes compared with their white counterparts. Gee, thanks. The study was conducted by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and according to the data, black homeowners pay higher mortgage rates at origination, more in mortgage insurance premiums, and higher property taxes. All right, in addition, and according to the study, interest charges for black buyers on home purchase loans, they were $250 more a year, resulting in over $11,000 in lost retirement savings. And that's not all. Because we have less access to affordable refinancing options, it turns out black homeowners are paying an average of $475 more per year than white counterparts, of course, resulting in an additional $20,000 in lost retirement savings. Systemic racism. And let's talk about your property taxes, because it turns out that the appeals process is far more burdensome for African Americans than for whites, and it benefits the areas, property tax assessment areas are so large they end up benefiting the white homeowners, not the black homeowners. Some say that these areas should be zip code based to actually reduce racial inequality in property tax assessments by at least 55 to 70%. America. And if you are, we're going to move on. If you are in a Democratic run state, you are fueling the economy. Yes, you are. The red state people just want to talk about all this yin yang, but the reality is we're paying for them and we don't like it. All right, Democratic voting areas fuel 2/3 of the American economy. Republican-led parts of the United States are simply not carrying their weight. They're not very productive. Billions from blue states keep many Republican voting states afloat. Income and education levels, you should know, and you already know this because you can pretty much guess this. Income and education levels are rapidly increasing in Democratic areas, but in the red states, where ignorance is bliss in many cases, education and income are stagnant or declining. Red states, stop. Look at these numbers and let's work together so everybody can be working on equal footing in all areas, not just areas that benefit you. All right, now, ignorance is not the only thing keeping back the red states. There's also the epidemic of opioid and alcohol-fueled suicides that is running rampant in the red states. Republicans are attacking those Democratic-run cities. They also forget about those billions of dollars that are in the blue states that are keeping their states afloat. So when they talk about how much they hate socialism, they should really just go look in the mirror, because right now socialism is the only reason the red states are surviving. That's right. All right, let's go on. We've got a new, this is such good that you probably heard it. I hope you've heard it. If not, jump on the bandwagon. We've got a new majority Black and Latinx owned and operated digital bank. Yes, people, it's thanks to Bounce TV founder Ryan Glover and his close friend, that would be rapper activist Killer Mike, folks. Killer Mike is killing it, huh? Okay? His real name is Michael Render, in case you want to know. Now, along with former Atlanta Mayor Andy Young, and we know how long Andy Young has been out there stomping for us, okay? They're all part of the leadership team at Greenwood Bank. Now, it doesn't open till January, but the website is up now, so you can get on the waiting list if you want to open a Greenwood account. And it's just like Chime, and you know you got a Chime account. Okay, so you need to have a Greenwood account, all right? Almost everything is done online. The bank does have a global ATM network. Also, Apple and Android Pay systems are used. And you should also know you can get 2-day advances on your paycheck, and that's for customers who sign up for a direct deposit. Get on that website today, people. Glover says the bank is going to specialize in financing Black and Latinx entrepreneurs. Woo! We need that, as you know, who have a harder time securing loans from commercial banks, if at all. No matter how good your idea is, they're not financing you. Greenwood Bank gets its name, of course, from that Greenwood district. You remember that? That was in Tulsa, Oklahoma. That's the African-American business community that was so prosperous, it was nicknamed Black Wall Street. But then the jealous and mean white Americans destroyed the Greenwood district during the 1921 Tulsa race massacre. Ryan Glover, Killer Mike, and Andy Young, you know, they've all done very well in their lives, so you do need to think about listening to them. And you should also know this, that today a dollar circulates for 20 days in the white community. 20 days. Every day for 20 days, that dollar's working for the white community. But in the Black community, it only circulates for 6 hours. What's wrong with you? It only circulates for 6 hours. Stop. Where are you getting your hair? Okay, remember that. Okay, before it was nearly destroyed it was destroyed, not nearly destroyed. It was destroyed nearly a century ago. Ryan Glover says a dollar spent in Tulsa's Greenwood district, guess how long it circulated? It circulated 36 times before leaving the community. Come on, people. Come on now. Now, we should tell you more. CocaCola, we're traveling on to other economic news, is putting an end to 200 drink brands, which account for about half of its portfolio. The underperforming products include Zika coconut water, Odwalla, Tab Diet Soda. Finally got rid of that. Coca-Cola Life and Diet Coke Feisty Cherry, as well as some regional brands. One of them is called Northern Neck Ginger Ale. It's gone. All right, we turn to international news, where the United States under Trump is working hard to restrict the rights of women. We know he loves to do that. Okay, he's signed an anti-abortion declaration now with a group of largely authoritarian governments. We're talking about governments like Saudi Arabia. Okay, so we want to be like them. He wants us to be like them, but we're not having it, okay? You should also know that most of the signatories are among the 20 worst countries in which to be a woman, according to the Women, Peace, and Security Index that was established by Georgetown University. And then in COVID news, why would Donald Trump shut a vaccine safety office a year ago? The office was dedicated to the safety of vaccines. And that's because rolling out a vaccine is tricky, people. We got to get everybody in the world vaccinated. Certainly the 340 some odd million people in the United States have to be vaccinated, okay? So we need a lot of coordination to make that happen. And that's what that White House office was supposed to do. But of course, they got rid of it because they don't think things through. Now, you know, after somebody takes a vaccine, it is possible to have a heart attack or stroke or any other illness shortly after that injection. So staying safe is very, very important. It does require a coordinated effort by hospitals and drug makers and insurers, because they're looking at the patterns that come in the flow of data. So as they look at those patterns, they can shift and adjust. And that was all coordinated through the White House until Trump became president. And now we have a pandemic. Honest to goodness. You know, as my mother used to say, if I had a brain, I'd be dangerous, and we know who that applies to, and, although he is dangerous. And then let's go on, because I want you to know that Arkansas is the only state in the country that allows landlords to file criminal charges against tenants if they fall behind on their rent in a pandemic. They're still doing it in a pandemic. In Arkansas, if your rent is even 1 day overdue, one day, you can be kicked out. All right, and if you don't leave your home within 10 days of getting your kick-out notice, then you can be charged with a misdemeanor, and we know how that's playing out. Black and low income, Those are the people who are getting kicked out, and those are the people who are getting the criminal charges, all right? Arkansas is so mean that even though we have a national moratorium on evictions, thanks to the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, that hasn't stopped Arkansas. At least 24 new cases have been filed, and you know the game because you know who they're filed against. ProPublica found that between mid-March and mid-September of this year, women made up more than 65% of the tenants with criminal evictions filed against them, and you know those women are walking around with those children. How bad is it for women, and particularly for black women? You should know that black women in Arkansas earn 65 cents for every single dollar white men earn, and you should also know this. In September of 2020, the Bureau of Labor Statistics says more than 800,000 women nationwide left the labor force, and we know it wasn't by their own accord. How many men left? About 25% of that. That's a disgrace. I'm Carol Angela Davis. Thanks for watching. I'll have Dr. Kaye with me later on today, and I'm going to have a great interview for you. I think you're going to enjoy it because we're going to talk about home ownership and why now is actually the time and what you can do to get that house you've been wanting. Stay with me. Well, thank you so much for staying with me. I'm bringing you Rod C. today. He's going to talk to you about generational wealth. He is in Arlington, Texas, and he's a mortgage broker with Wallach and Volk Mortgage Brokers. Thank you, Rod, for joining us today. We appreciate you.
I appreciate you, Carol, for having me.
Thank you. Now, let's just talk about generational wealth. What is it? Why do we need it? And how do we get it?
Generational wealth is just an asset that one generation passes on to the next. Something that doesn't come where you owe a lot of money against it. It's something that you can use to sell, something you can use to, assets for your pockets, whatever. But it's basically saying from one generation to the next. And the biggest generational transfer of wealth is always real estate. It's never cash. Cash can be spent and gone. But generally, property, commercial buildings, residential is probably the number one thing where you pass your grandmother's house on to your mother who passed it on to you. That's generational wealth.
Okay, now let's talk about real estate. Let's talk about, because some people live in the hood. Well, not obviously everybody doesn't live in the hood, but a lot of people do.
Right.
And people try to make people who live in the hood think their property ain't worth anything. Tell us about that.
It's absolutely incorrect. Absolutely. That same house that grandmother owned in the hood, that when she bought it was $5,000, that same house today is probably worth about $200,000. People don't realize always property appreciates. There's never been a time in history where over more than a 7 or 8 year period, you've seen property values go down. I don't care if you live in California, New York, Florida, Texas, Michigan, it does not matter. Property always appreciates. It's kind of like that thing I always say, hey, land is so valuable. Why? Because there's only so much of it. You can't go out and create new land. So therefore, if you own a piece of property, that will appreciate no matter what.
Now, what about vacant land? Because, in a lot of these neighborhoods all over America, there's like vacant lots and they're just sitting there. And what about those lots? Can you buy those, and should you?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, if you're smart and you watch what you're doing, you can get them pretty much for pennies on the dollar. And then somebody or you could come along and build a nice house for a family. And now that could be a rental house that you're creating rental income for you. It could be a flip where now you take that $70,000 investment or whatever it is, and now you make $200,000 on it. Or simply it could be that next generation of what they call it when they come in and they take the old neighborhood.
Gentrification.
Exactly, right. You could be in the front of that gentrification. I'm sure there's a lot of people in Brooklyn wish they would have held on to some properties back then, even though they were burnt out buildings, but now there's a Starbucks in that same building.
Well, look at Detroit. My goodness gracious. Exactly. That property was going for $1 a lot. For the cost of going to the store and getting yourself a slice of pizza, you could have had a lot.
I got a friend of mine, she couldn't give the property away. She went to the county in Detroit and you can have the property. They would not take it. But now that same property is probably worth $100,000. And we're not talking 30, 40 years ago. We're talking about like 7 or 8 years ago.
That's right.
Smart people, smart communities, smart cultures. That's what they do. You don't buy when it's high. You buy when it's low.
Absolutely. And so let me ask you this, because we know this is a time now where the interest rates are very, very low.
Yes.
Tell us about that and how people should be thinking about that.
I've actually been in the industry now a little less than 20 years, about 17 years I've been in the industry. And all through my 17 years, rates have actually come down and down and down and down. Every time somebody asks me, hey, do you think rates will go down any further? My first inclination is to say, no, they won't. But they always do, right? Right now, it's the lowest rates in my history of being in the mortgage business, the lowest rates ever. What that means for anybody that's buying a house, that same house that was going to cost you 200,000, you could buy the same exact house with the same payment, but now it's $250,000 because the interest rates are so much less that you're paying that much less in interest. Therefore, you can purchase a bigger house for the same payment.
So more house, different house, bigger house, different, whatever it is, but your payment's not going to change because a lot of people just still think they have to rent.
Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, I hate the fact that in our mentality, especially as a culture, only 40 some odd % of us actually own homes. Whereas in other cultures, it's 70, 75%.
So we have
It's
to
almost like that inclination that we think, oh, you know what? That's not really for me. Absolutely, it's for you. Every single day is for you. And one of the things that we do here at our company and our branch, we specifically work with people who other individuals told no. Like if somebody's told you no, you're kind of gun shy. But that's who I want to talk to. I want to talk to you because I'm not ever going to tell you no. I never tell a client no. I just tell them how. It's a totally different conversation.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Rod, because a lot of people get told no, and then they're like embarrassed. Like, I don't want to go to somebody else because they're going to tell me no, and I've got this problem and that problem. But we can't think like that.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, and the reason why is because at some point in my life, I wasn't ready to buy a house. If you were to look at my credit score or look at where I was in life, they probably would have told me no too as well. But I had some people sit down and say, hey, this is what you got to do. And they walk me through it. And a lot of times the game plan to be successful in purchasing property is a lot less than what you think. I work with a lot of people all day long and they come to me with 500 credit score or 550 credit score.
Can they buy?
Absolutely. And matter of fact, I'll give them the pointers that they need to get to. And generally it takes about 30 or 60 days. I was looking at a lady the other day. When she came to me, her credit score was 560. This was 30 days ago. Right now, her credit score is 660. And I'm not doing what people think, credit repair. I'm just looking at the credit report, running a simulation and saying, if you pay this, this, and this, your score will go up. And she's so excited. She's in contract today, getting ready to close next week.
And that's where you should be, especially to my young people now. To my young people, you need to get yourself a piece of property right now. Now, Rod, let's talk a little bit about refis, because a lot of people own property and their rate might have been 5, 6, 7, 8, even 8%.
Absolutely.
What should they be doing?
They really need to refi. And let me tell you, there's 2 reasons why anybody would refi. Number 1, of course, the most obvious reason is to lower your interest rate. But really, number 2, and sometimes people forget this, to pay that asset, that debt off sooner. So you can have a free and clear house, right? Because I think about it, if you come to me and say, hey, if I put an extra $100 on top of this payment, and now instead of having it for 25 years, now I can knock it down in 15, that's a lot more manageable than still thinking I got 25 more years left on this loan. Yes. Happens all the time. I was working with a client today, same exact thing. They said, we going for the 15 years because the rate for them was 2%, 2% on a 15-year. And their rate wasn't bad. Their rate was like 4.25 or something like that. But now for virtually the same payment, maybe $50 higher, they go from 20, and they were at 29 years. They just bought the house. From 29 years down to 15 years, they can pay that off. And you think about it, having a free and clear asset.
Place to live. Nobody can throw you out. Hello.
There you go.
Gotta have that. Rod, real quick, tell us about people who have a bankruptcy and or a foreclosure and or student loans.
Student loans, no issue. Like if you got a student loan, even if it's deferment, even if it's in forbearance, if it's on an income-based repayment plan, it doesn't matter. Can't be in collection, but if it's actually in some sort of status where you're saying, hey, I know what's going on here, then we can deal with that, right? If you go to bankruptcy, you still have to wait on a bankruptcy only 2 years after the bankruptcy. Okay. Now, Let me explain to you what that means, though. That's on a Chapter 7. That means you discharged everything. If you're in a 13 where you're actually paying it out, you can actually get a loan while you're in a 13 as long as the court, the bankruptcy attorney or bankruptcy judge agrees that it's okay. Okay.
That's perfect.
And on a foreclosure, do you have to wait 3 years?
So there's no reason why anybody out there, listen now. There's no reason why anybody out there should not get that property. Let's get that generational wealth. We know what we have to do as a people. And before I let you go, Rod, please tell them, you mentioned an asset. What is the difference between an asset and a liability?
An asset is something that generates wealth for you, something that if you had to, you could sell and make money on. A liability is somebody else's asset, means you're paying somebody else. It's the difference between owning a house and renting a house, right? Rent is a liability or an expense for you, but for the person who owns the building or owns that house, it's an asset for them. It generates income for them, but it costs you money every single month if it's a liability.
Now let's talk culturally just for 1 second before we let Rod go. Let's just talk culturally. Now, what about those red bottom shoes? Those designer purses, you know you got them, and all that stuff you got in your house, and you're renting from somebody else who could frankly throw you out at a moment's notice. What about that, Rod?
That is ridiculous, right?
I know. All of those people need to take that money, put it together. And how much do you need for a $100,000 house? How much do you need for a down payment?
$3,500.
So 3.5 pairs of red bottom shoes. You can
exactly right.
All that hair you're buying, and guess what? We talked about this in my news segment. Who are you buying it from? But the point is, all that money, that $3,500, you know you got that. You could have had yourself a house for you and your children and your grands.
I had a quote. The quote was I saw the other day, and the quote was, a rich person or a wealthy person, they invest first and they spend second. Okay. A person that's broke,
right,
they spend first, and then if there happens to be anything left over, they invest it. But 9 times out of 10, there is nothing left over after they spend. So invest your money first.
Mentality, because it's always something to buy, and it's all good. It's always something to buy.
But and you know what? That's the economy. That's the culture. It's the United States culture. And I think we get caught up into all these commercials and everything about you got to have the latest and greatest. You got to have you got people standing outside of Apple 7-8 hours to get the new $1,200 cell phone, right? But nobody's standing out front.
Payment right there.
Exactly. Nobody's standing in front of Fidelity starting a 401k, 7-8 hours. They're not doing that. So it's just a mentality switch, and we got to switch. We got to make that change as a culture, or we'll always be second behind the other situations and second behind the other cultures, because we don't understand that we can actually change the trajectory of not just of who we are, but what our generation is going to look like. Individuals, I got a story, and I'll end it with this. So I know a lady she bought a house in 1930. She paid $500 for it, right? Milwaukee, Wisconsin, $500 for this house. Today, that house is worth over $500,000. Now, she bought that almost 100 years ago, but it's still in their family today, and it went from $500 to $500,000 in net worth. That's the type of generational wealth that we're talking about.
Thank you so much. That is Rod C. He is with Wallach and Volk Real Estate, or actually Wallach and Volk Mortgage Brokers, They're in Arlington, Texas. And let's give them a phone number real quick, or some way to contact you, Instagram.
If you need to catch up with me, just call the office. I'm at 817-533-0101, 817-533-0101, or you can jump online, Rod C Mortgage. That's RODSEE Mortgage, Facebook, IG. Every time you can catch up.
No reason why you can't reach him. Exactly. And there's no reason why you shouldn't have a piece of property. I'm Carol Angela Davis. We thank you so much for joining us this week and every week on Impact Network News. I'll be back with Dr. Kaye, so stay with me. Have a good day, and we'll see you soon. Thank you, Rod.
Appreciate it, Carol. Thank you.
No problem.
Carol Angela Davis here with your commentary. We want to talk to you today about unpacking the U.S. Supreme Court. They're talking about packing it, but we know the deal. We have to unpack it because right now it's packed, and it has been packed since the year the Supreme Court started. And folks, for those you don't know, that was in 1789. So all of a sudden it's a problem. Okay, we're going to unpack it. Get this, folks, okay? Because right now the Supreme Court consists of 9 justices. 6 of them, did you know, are Catholics? So right now it's packed with Catholics. All right, we're not going to have that. All right, there have been 114 justices on the U.S. Supreme Court. 110 or 96.5% have been men. People talk about packing the court. And all of them were white and of European heritage. So it wasn't until 1967, that was 178 years after the court started, not until 1967 did we get an African American on the court. That would be Thurgood Marshall, who was appointed by Lyndon Johnson and then was the president. Since then, only 2 other non-white justices have been appointed. That's right, Clarence Thomas in 1991, and in 2009, Barack Obama appointed Sonia Sotomayor as the first Latinx Supreme Court justice. She comes from New York City, and she is born of Puerto Rican parentage, okay? It wasn't until 1981 when America finally got its first woman on the court. That was Sandra Day O'Connor. She was appointed by Ronald Reagan. All right, then Ruth Bader Ginsburg joined the court later in 1993. She was appointed by Bill Clinton. There has never been a justice with any Asian, Native American, or Pacific Islander heritage. Never, all right? And no person having such a heritage was publicly considered for an appointment until the 21st century. So don't tell me the court isn't packed. We got to unpack it. No Supreme Court justice, you should know, has ever identified himself or herself as anything other than heterosexual. So much for gender diversity. And even though there are lots of religions practiced in the good old United States of America, and many of them are sizable, the following religions have never had a member on the U.S. Supreme Court. We're talking about Orthodox Christians, Mormons, Pentecostals, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, and Sikhs. Don't leave out Quakers. None of them have had a justice on the U.S. Supreme Court. And the last justice to have served in the military during wartime was John Paul Stevens. He was in naval intelligence during World War II, and he retired 10 years ago as the 3rd longest serving justice in the history of the U.S. Supreme Court. We don't even have any real veterans on the court, okay? So it's time to unpack the Supreme Court from its history of white supremacy, that's right, and put enough justices on the court to reflect the true diversity of our nation. That's why we have to make the court bigger. All right, the current court is not only mostly white, it is also mostly Catholic, and guess what? They're all Roman Catholics. There's not even any diversity in the Catholic Church, Catholic religion. And all the Catholics on the court are conservative, so no diversity of thought there. This is our country, it is our government, and it is our court, and we must insist that it represents our nation. All right, we need a larger court so that we can get the benefit of the thinking of all of the different people in our country. All right, and most of them, frankly, are not Roman Catholics. Ding dong, all right? And one other thing, most of the justices, you should know, are rich. They are upper middle to high social status. They were mostly raised in non-rural but not necessarily urban environments, so no diversity of thought there. They come, except for we have Sonia Sotomayor. She was in New York, thank goodness. They come economically from comfortable families, and about 3/5, get this, 3/5 of those named to the Supreme Court personally knew the president who confirmed them. So if you're not even in the right social circle, you can't even get on the court. I don't care how smart you are. We got to make a slot for those people. No financial diversity at a time when, frankly, most people are poor or in the process of becoming poor, thanks to the pandemic and all of the other problems that have gone on in this country over the years. We must unpack that Supreme Court, and we can only do that by adding justices to the court, making the court much larger so that we can reflect the true diversity of our nation. Once the election's over, don't stop fighting, people. That's our next fight. I'm Carol Angela Davis. Thanks for watching.
I am Carol Angela Davis. I am back at you. You know, I've got Dr. Kaye with you. We have been talking about breast cancer for those of you who've been watching for the last couple of weeks, because it's a big topic and it deserves a lot of attention. Now, what about people who have that breast cancer gene? Well, Dr. Kaye is with us. Welcome, Dr. Kaye.
Welcome. Thanks for having me. It's good to be back.
Absolutely. Now, you were talking about those people who, you know, unfortunately have that breast cancer gene. What can they do to help themselves?
Well, it turns out that there are things that can be done to reduce the actual expression of the mutated gene. So those patients have inherited a mutated gene, and they're called the BRCA genes, breast cancer, BRCA. But there's also 15 other genes in the genome that also play a role in development of breast cancer. The BRCA genes were studied, and what they found is that the patients only have 55 to 88% chance of developing breast cancer. So what else is in play that makes those genes express themselves? And some of those things are food. So let's talk about it. There's a syndrome called metabolic syndrome, and metabolic syndrome consists of high blood pressure, high cholesterol, high blood sugar, and abdominal obesity. Okay. And all together, it's called metabolic syndrome. Metabolic syndrome is very much associated with cardiovascular disease, but it's also associated with the development of breast cancer in patients who carry the breast cancer gene. Who knew? Yes. These patients who have metabolic syndrome and carry the BRCA genes have a much higher incidence of developing breast cancer during their lifetime. So the study was done, and in this case, the patient was placed on a Mediterranean diet. Now that diet is not just a plant-based diet, it also includes fish. The patient's weight was controlled, their BMI stayed below 25, their cholesterol was normal, their blood sugar was normal, their blood pressure was normal, and those patients had less of a breast cancer diagnosis, and if they had already had breast cancer, they were less likely to have a recurrence.
So first of all, just because you have the gene, turns out, doesn't mean you're gonna get that BRCA gene. We know that's one that scares us. But just because you have the gene, it turns out it doesn't mean you're gonna get breast cancer. And there are some things you can do. Dr. Kaye is telling us about them, this metabolic syndrome. So if you get on that Mediterranean diet, are you saying you could turn Mediterranean syndrome around, or maybe metabolic syndrome around, or maybe you'll never get it?
Exactly. And when you combine that with daily exercise, in other words, we're going back to our same themes: weight control, blood pressure control, cholesterol control, and glucose control. Also, patients who carry the BRCA gene and have had breast cancer are much more likely during their lifetime to be diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Somehow the BRCA gene and glucose regulation are somehow intertwined, and all of the details are not known. The other thing that was found is that patients that have a vitamin D deficiency or an iron deficiency and carry the BRCA genes were much more likely to develop breast cancer at a younger age. Yes.
So that vitamin D, as you're telling us, of course, she's been telling you, get out in that sunshine 30 minutes a day. Even if you're sitting on the stoop, at least the sun is shining on you, even if the day is overcast.
Yes, exactly. It's very important. And who knew how important it was in reducing your risk of cancer? Yeah. So we're talking about the whole foods plant-based diet. And again, I want to reiterate, what is a whole food? I have a peach here, for example. Now, the whole peach, I'm not going to the supplement aisle and taking a supplement of some of the nutrients that are in the peach. I'm eating the peach. I'm eating the flesh. I'm eating the skin. All of this is the whole food. It gives me fiber. It gives me the sweet juice and flavor of the peach. It gives me all of the vitamin minerals that are in the peach. So this is an example of a whole food, a whole apple. Plant-based vitamins and minerals come from the dirt. So the plant-based diet is very important in getting the vitamins and the minerals in the way that we can get them. The animal-based diet does not contain these, and it takes up room on our plate where we could have more of plant-based foods. So our dietary choices, our everyday dietary choices, are very important to our health.
Two quick questions for you, Dr. Kaye. Number one, how many of those peaches or whatever do I have to eat a day?
Well, you know, they have a theory called reductionism, and reductionism means we're not really reducing our diet down to doses and components and supplements. What we're saying is the entire meal is found in the fruit and vegetable aisle, the beans, anything that is growing in the ground. And when you eat that, some days you may not eat a peach, but as long as your diet is filled with a variety of textures, colors, fruits, vegetables, things that are not coming from animals, you will be fine.
What if you love meat and you say, okay, I'm willing to give up my animal-based diet, but how many could I have meat once a week or twice a week? I mean, what can I do if I just don't know if I can give my meat up just like that?
Well, I would say, first of all, I would call you human. I would call you raised with a Western diet.
Yes.
You know, we were all raised the same way and still are being raised the same way. And so my suggestion is gradually, you know, it doesn't have to be something that occurred overnight. It may be a day where you eat some meat. You're not the worst person in the world, but as long as you're recognizing the health benefits of the diet, and you're understanding why, and you're giving in to the better feeling, the energy, the mental health, then you know that you're going to be better off. Weight control is so very important. Obesity is a carcinogen.
It's interesting because some of these foods, they look so good, and frankly, they taste so good, and
Yes,
it's hard to give them up just like that.
And I think realistically that you probably are not, but as long as we're all working towards our wellness and working towards our health and getting outside every day, I think understanding what we're eating and what it can do for us or against us is very important.
Well, and also for our children. I mean, you can teach your kids and your grandkids or whoever you got over there, you can teach them how to eat healthy while you're helping your own self. Because if you got the BRCA gene, it is inherited. Is that correct, Dr. Kaye? It is inherited?
Yes, yes.
That means somebody else has it. So
Yeah.
why wouldn't you take your next generation and teach them how to avoid the expression of the BRCA gene? And before we close, I just want to ask you this, Dr. Kaye. When you say the expression of the gene, what does that mean? And what does that mean?
Well, what I mean is you have inherited, if they say I have the breast cancer gene, you have inherited a gene that everybody has. Everybody has the BRCA gene.
Oh.
But some people have inherited a mutated form of that gene. And that's what people are calling the breast cancer gene. It's a mutated form.
So it's
Now, just because I have a mutated gene doesn't mean that the gene expresses itself. It doesn't mean that I'm going to get cancer. So what we're trying to do is say, if I have that gene, how can I do whatever I can to make sure that that mutated gene is not expressed? And when it gets expressed, that means that I'm diagnosed with breast cancer.
Now, how do they know if they have the mutated? Since we know we all have the BRCA gene. How do you know if you've got the mutated BRCA gene?
Well, you know, you'll have a family history of breast cancer. Now, again, last week we discussed sporadic breast cancer, no family history, but people are finding out within their family history who had breast cancer, who had it, who died of it, who's in remission. And this type of family history is very important. And actually, that's what I'm going to be discussing next week is our disease family history, or we could say our wellness family history.
Yeah. We always think of it in terms of, oh, this, I'm going to get this, I'm going to get that. But really, sounds like we should be thinking of it in terms of what is it in my family history that keeps me strong and healthy, as opposed to what is it that makes me weak, and then just eat right.
Exactly. And knowing, again, our food choices and the consequences of them, and also knowing where, you know, quote unquote, the bones are buried so that we can live the healthiest, longest life that we can.
And get out there and walk. I'm Carol Angela Davis. Thank you, Dr. Kaye. She has really taught us a lot about breast cancer, and I hope you've been paying attention. If not, just go back and get the shows. If you're on Deck TV, just go back and look at the shows, because then you can see the whole series on breast cancer, very important to us. I'm Carol Angela Davis. I thank you, Dr. Kaye. She'll be back next week, and she's already told you what she's going to be talking about, and that is your wellness journey based on your family history. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week. I'm Carol Angela Davis. Thank you, Dr. Kaye.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Not a problem. We're happy to have you here.